Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Yes, they did. They absolutely got it right in. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and I'm again delighted that you're with me as we continue to move through the month of January, looking at, oh my goodness, all of the things that, quite frankly, our founders would be appalled at. What we are seeing, taking the time to reflect on the mirrors of history, if you will, there's a couple of things that I definitely am going to cover, but I do want to go through the steps, not the steps in total, but at least make a comment about the impeachment insanity just for a moment. What I will be covering today, though, ultimately in second and third segments, some of in this first segment, is a continuation of talking about the postmodernism, because I think that is absolutely critical to what is happening right now in the whole impeachment debacle. And in addition to that, what I am going to talk about on today's program is Red for Ed. Red for Ed is a big hash mark that's out there. And honestly, when you really start digging into it, I have there in the documentation and in the references where you can go see that the NEA is on board with this 100%. And the NEA's perspective on it is nothing as which the founder of Red for Ed's perspective and intent is, nor wait a minute, Tom, I got to take that back. Let me stop for a second. The Red for Ed, from the NEA's perspective, is exactly what the founder of Red for Ed was all about, with the NEA substance spin on it. So we're going to discuss both the postmodernism, what that means within the context of the church, what that means in the context of the political insanities that are going on, and then we'll get into where have all the teachers gone? Where have they gone? That's the title of today's program. Where have all the teachers gone? There's a number of different things that are happening within our educational system. So let's take a few minutes and discuss, not even looking at any notes, not anything else, but just discuss for a few minutes the whole impeachment debacle. I call it a debacle because, as is again in your references, and those references are at samueladamsreturns.net. That's where all of our program archives are, and so the references are in the archives for today's program. So when you take a look in there, you will see that this past week, I think it was on Wednesday, that Nancy Pelosi chose her impeachment process managers who are going to act as the persecutors, and I said that correctly, act as the persecutors during the Senate trial. Now, the interesting aspect of that, right off the bat, is that two of the persecutors were the lead persecutors in the process. And the most lead persecutor in the process was none other than Adam Schiff. You have to excuse me a moment, I had a hiccup there. And so as I was mentioning, is that the lead persecutor for the deamoncrats is none other than Adam Schiff. It's just to say the corruption in that. And part of my thinking has been that by taking and making him and none other than Jerry the Hutt, that Jabba the Hutt, Pizza the Hutt, analogy that I pulled a few weeks ago, is that I'm thinking that the strategy on that is that it makes it more unlikely that especially Schiff can be called as a witness during the Senate trial. Now, as we take and we look at the remainder of those so-called managers that Nancy Pelosi has put in there as that persecution team, we can see that half of them are members of, card-carrying members of none other than what I've talked to you about before, is the deamoncrat Progressive Caucus. They're socialists. They're straight up communists. They're that part that has been weaving its way in for 80, 100 years into the whole political system and bureaucratic system. This is exactly what the Kozak plan had talked about. And what we have is the pressure from above and the pressure from below. The pressure from below is all part of the media structure. And then what Project Veritas brought out this past week as well with one of Bernie Sanders' key people. And remember that Bernie Sanders was one of the founding members, along with Maxine Waters and others, of that Progressive Caucus. And that there you have Bernie, just anyway, that's a whole nother conversation unto itself. But what we have going on is a Bernie staffer, a nicely paid staffer, caught on Project Veritas saying everything that a pure Bolshevik, Marxist, Stalinist would say, is that those liberals are the first ones to put up against the wall. And we know from history that every communist regime, whether it was Castro, whether it was Stalin, whether it was Lenin, whether it was Chavez, whether it was Noriega, whether it was whomever, that, China is all Mao, come on, everything there. Their first order of business was to take those that help them get in and annihilate them, persecute them, throw them in prison, kill them. That is how they work. So this guy is, spewing that Marxist insanity, and you have to remember that half of the persecution team, or managers, as they're called by Nancy Pelosi, are members of that caucus. Now, we know also that Adam Schiff and the Jerry the Hutt are all part of that same mindset, although they have not taken and are members now of that caucus, but they participate in the things that caucus does, and they take on those leadership roles and promoting the ideologies of that caucus. So here we have it in what is going forward in this coming week relative to the Senate trial, and we have the persecutors, and we're most likely not going to see Adam Schiff be called as a witness. And you have to remember that in the process, what happens is that none of the Senate members can ask questions during the trial, that it is the Chief Justice that will preside over the trial, and that a Trump defense team will then be in making defense of the president. And so we will see yet what the structure of that trial is going to look like, because at this point, I don't know. I haven't taken the time to research it enough. But it will be very interesting to see what the persecutors lay out, and then how the defense is able to act, how they're going to be able to call witnesses, and then what type of questions, because the senators will be allowed to write questions that will then go to the Chief Justice, who will then take and work that process and bring those questions forward to the persecution and the defense. So, there it is. That's the summation. Now, where is that in the mirrors of history from Sam Adams' perspective and all of that, wow, it's way beyond what the founders ever expected or intended and looked at, because first off, the articles of impeachment that the demoncrats have come up with are stupid. They're all about exactly what I was talking about in postmodernism. So let me just take you through some reminders on this postmodernism. Is that what it says is that there are no absolute truths. Absolute truth does not exist. So for Schiff to make up the things that he makes up, Nadler to make up the things that they make up, to take and look at the Constitution as just a bunch of words on a piece of paper, that it has no covenant relationship, no contract relationship with the people or the states, is all part of that whole mental process that there are no absolute truths. And so in doing that, they deny any long-held beliefs and conventions and maintain that all viewpoints are equally valid, even if they're false viewpoints, even if they're absolute lies. So what that means is that it's all relative. It's all relative. The truth is relative. So when we have Adam Schiff making up the phone call on the House floor, it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense because it's relative to what Adam Schiff believes happened. And then with the support of the media and the support of all of the other mechanisms out there, it's okay. And you know what? You can change it. And it's all about feeling. It comes down to that one of the other definitions and perspectives inside of this whole idea of postmodernism is that there is nothing valid anymore. It comes down to the thinking process, and a lot of what I'm saying here and I'm reading to you are in your references as well, is that the shifts in science, and science has had its own revolution that perplexes all sorts of theories and making hard science irrelevant. And then if you take and you look at the revolutionary ideas that are out there, that's crazy. Philosophy has revolted, which is that whole process of thinking has gone away from good thinking and understanding and analytics to feelings. So that is why we see all these safe zones out there on campuses. That's why if I feel like a girl today, some little boy says in school, I am. But tomorrow, if I feel like I'm a boy again, that's okay, until mommy and daddy start taking and hitting them with drugs and then want to cut off their testicles. Oh, wow. Now that moves beyond feeling into physiology. But you see, that doesn't matter anymore in postmodernism. It doesn't matter that you're physically something. It doesn't matter how you were created. It doesn't matter. Well, yes, it does. It does matter. It matters in the eyes of God. It matters when we take and instead of looking at, and we'll talk about in the next two segments a little bit more on this postmodernism and then how that has affected into education and in the churches, but let's look at it from what we talked about last week a bit on the Unitarianism. And that if we do not understand the full context of the biblical God, the Reformation biblical God, then, yeah, postmodernism's all you got left. It's hopelessness. But Sam Adams understood all of that, and as well did the Anti-Federalists, and that's why they said that we know that the pulpits eventually will fail, because they were seeing the failure of the pulpits even in their own time. And it is important that we see what Sam Adams did as that last Puritan, and knowing that the Anti-Federalists, they did get it right in requiring what it would take to have a constitutional republic of these United States. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. They got it so right. It's just amazing as I look into those mirrors of history and understanding what was written and why they argued the positions that they argued. And with that, it's time again to take a look at what else is happening on Liberty Works Radio Network and at Soaring Eagle. But at Liberty Works Radio Network, there's all of this other programming during the week. And it's important that you take and see what else is there. So I ask you to go look at the other host pages. We're trying to do some other work together on some things. We'll see how that all works out as the year progresses. And yes, please donate. Donate to Liberty Works Radio Networks. It's what's keeping things going, and we really appreciate that effort. And remember that I am on 3 different time slots. I'm on at 1 a.m. on Saturdays, which makes it 10 p.m. Pacific on a Friday night, so the folks out there can catch the program early. Then again at 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings, and again at 7 p.m. On Liberty Works Radio Network. Also on Soaring Eagle at 7 p.m. So if you go to Soaring Eagle down in the Lima Market, you'll be able to catch me there. The important, though, is that with all these critical times, I know everybody's hammering, especially all of the, you're getting all of the political stuff and people wanting you to donate. But, if you can find it in yourself, please take and donate to Liberty Works Radio Network. Hit that donate button there on the website. So let's continue a tad here. That being a tad on this postmodern stuff, because as we finished out the first segment, the part that the anti-federalists, Sam Adams understood, and a good number of the anti-federalists understood, is that, as I brought out to some degree last week, that the whole idea of the Congregationalist and Puritans was changing. It was changing a bit in the late 1600s, mid 1700s. Talked about 1707 when Harvard lost its religious leadership and went over to that of a merchant. We saw then a change in education. Sam Adams' class, I believe, was the last graduating class or one of the last graduating classes where they learned by rote. And that means they didn't use textbooks per se. What they did is they wrote everything out from one book, one sets of notes, and they knew their material because it was that learning process of hearing, seeing, and writing and speaking. Because remember, Sam Adams could read, write, and speak Latin. He could read and write Greek. He could read and write Hebrew. He could speak a bit of French. John spoke more French, obviously, than he did. And he had some familiarity with German. How many 14-year-olds can we put in that category today? I know at 14, the only Latin I knew was the Latin I grew up around in church. And but when I went to a private high school, I had to learn Latin. I had to learn French. I had to learn German. In my adult life, I learned some Hebrew and I learned Greek. I studied those on my own. My Greek and Hebrew are very rusty, and my Latin is what it is. It's very, very poor at best. But these founding members of this nation had that educational basis, and they understood clearly that truth mattered, that truth came from biblical information, as I've been putting in on the wisdom of Sam Adams, that knowledge comes from those core ideas that are biblical. And the first place for knowledge is right out of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. It's knowing God, the fear of God. And that fear of God means an understanding of God, not the, oh, I'm afraid. Well, you should be. As a sinner, we should be afraid of God, from that perspective. But the point of having that shift in education at that time was that then just outside of Harvard's campus, a Unitarian church went in where they were going against that whole idea of Reformation biblical theology. They went from going away from what did a triune God mean. When you start thinking on that, and they're, talk about I don't want to get into all the theology of it, but the fact is that if you really study the Old Testament and study it, you will see that, yes, there's the Father, and Jesus is the creator, and that the Holy Spirit is the enabler. And that's in the Old Testament, okay? And it's not just about love, 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 love. That's all Jesus taught, and that's all God's about is love, love. No, there's a whole lot more to it, because then when you read Leviticus, there's a bunch of laws in there that are still relevant within the basic concepts of the Ten Commandments. So when we get to this whole thing on this postmodernism, we saw those shifts in history beginning, and this is why the Anti-Federalists looked at that differentiation of what the Federalists were expecting, is that the pulpits would always do their job, and we would have a moral and virtuous people that would be able to self-govern and then have the good and proper principles for governance within the communities and a society, and for constitutionalism. Well, yeah, the Anti-Federalists got that right as well, you see, because they said, no, the pulpits may not be able to handle that. They may not speak that truth. They may not hold to those foundational principles. And we saw it beginning right there in 1707 and prior to it, when the theology of the fundamentals of the Reformation, and even the fundamentals of that core concept in Catholicism of a triune God, were smashed. Okay. And as that began to change through that time period, wow, we get the thinking we have today. And then when they rejected God totally over on the continent, and you started getting into all of these other, as Paul talks about, vain philosophies, if you will, the whole essence of it does come down to vanity and idolatry. There's a very good article that I have in there for you talking about idolatry. And let me see. It is, once again, the Idols and Grace, re-envisioning the political ideas. And this was from a guy that's an attorney over in England. He's very interesting, a barrister, if I may. But trying to look at this and trying to unconfuse those who speak grace only and forget about the rest of how God functions, and then confuses that in such a way that it impacts what does it mean of the authority of God to actually govern as well. So that then wraps it back into this whole thing on this postmodernism, in that there's 5 main tenets of that. And this is very interesting, especially from a Christian perspective, is that the first tenet of this modern postmodernism, because as you can tell from what I've been saying, is that Yes, back in 1707, they were starting postmodernism by shifting the theological thinking away from a triune God into a unitary God, which allows then for all of the other so-called religions that only have a unitary God and allow for everything. So, here we have it. The tenet number one of these defined 5 tenets is one, reality is in the mind of the beholder. Reality is what is real to me, and I construct my own reality in my mind, says Adam Schiff as he stands in Congress and reads a made-up phone call. 2, people are not able to think independently because they are defined, scripted, molded by their culture, says Bernie Sanders and all of the communists and the Nancy Pelosi's and again the Adam Schiffs and the AOCs and the Tlaibs and all of the others who are socialist, communists, and jihadists. Number 3 tenet, we cannot judge things in another culture or another person's life because our reality may be different from theirs. There is no possibility of transcultural objectivity. Well, our founders said, if you want to come to America, you need to become an American. That means that in America, there is really only one culture, and that's the American culture, which has been destroyed because of principles 1 and 2. And leaves us with 3 that says you can't judge all of these other folks that are coming in because, it's their reality, not yours. Number 4 in this whole thing on postmodernism, we are moving in a direction of progress, but are arrogantly dominating nature and threatening our future. Boy, that's all of the little Torberger, the little chick that's all confused because sadly she has mental depression disorders, and so she can read the scripts of what was said in number 3 because everybody is scripted. And actually that was number 2, that they're scripted and molded. So you have these people that are scripted and molded, and then that will take us into our section in the last segment about the educational system and where the teachers are. And then let's go on to number 5. Nothing is ever proven, either by science, history, or any other discipline. So that becomes extremely interesting in that now we have all of the financial oligarchy of potheads that are out there going after legalizing marijuana, in the fact that it causes, statistically and proven, it causes psychosis, especially in those of young people up to and sometimes through the age of 25. But that science doesn't matter. You know what? The money's out there to be made. We can take and shape the culture. We can take and program all these people through the educational system. We're going to do the red for ed. We're going to bring that socialism 100% into education. We're going to do all these things that we'll talk about. The NEA is behind 100% because it's on their website. And you know what? The rest of it doesn't matter. So that means we reject biblical truth. We reject those absolutes. We reject all of those foundational biblical principles. And that's why you had, what was that, Alabama? Throwing the 10 Commandments out of the Supreme Court building. You know what I'm waiting for? I'm waiting for them to take a chisel to the U.S. Supreme Court building above the justices where the 10 Commandments are and have that chiseled away. But you know something? God is sovereign. And if we pay attention to real truth and you become a truth seeker, as Samuel Adams was his whole life and what he promoted his whole life, as did many of the anti-federalists, then you know what? We can turn things around. But it's up to you. And I know I'm preaching at a choir on this program, but hopefully I'm enlightening you with those mirrors of history, because we know that Sam Adams, yep, he got it, and so did those anti-federalists, and that's why we continue to fight today, because of them. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I'm delighted that you're here with me and that you can get the archives of this program at none other than samueladamsreturns.net. And I want to thank all of you with Soaring Eagle Radio that are rejoining me into this third segment. I would encourage you to go to that archive at samueladamsreturns.net and listen to the whole podcast, or check it out on YouTube. Please subscribe on YouTube. That helps. But you know what? If you download the podcast, wonderful. For all of those that are from Blueberry, from even the Google Schmoogle Doogle site, as well as the Apple site that may be listening and downloading this program, thank you. And please subscribe there as well. That'd be wonderful if you did that. But, also, if you're interested in watching the video and my smiling face, just take and go ahead and subscribe on YouTube. But all your archives are at samueladamsreturns.net. And I thank you for checking all that out. Now, we've been talking about, and we talked a lot about in the last segment, the effects, the principles, or the principles, I'll call them that, of postmodernism. And we see it in the churches. We see it in not only in the Unitarian Church, but we see it in a lot of the major denominations. And it's even crept into Judaism, Catholicism, other isms, and this, that, and the other thing, and a good portion of the major Protestant denominations. And sadly, portions of it have crept into the evangelical, non-denominational environments as well. Because one of the tenets, that's what they are, tenets, principles, tenets, same thing, is, kind of focused on environmentalism. And we're seeing that in a lot of the evangelical, so-called potentially conservative evangelical environments, that we have some of that nonsense going on as well. But I wanted to bring you to the title of the program. Where have all the teachers gone? Where have they gone? Well, there's lots of teachers out there. There are jobs left and right. But the teachers of our founding era are necessarily not there. In fact, if you take and you go through the news in general, and you take and you go to DuckDuckGo is a search engine that I use, and Start Page is another secure place that I go for a search engine, is that, and you put in there the persecution of teachers, persecution of conservative teachers, persecution of Christian teachers, you will see now more than ever. And I'm not talking about at the college level. I am talking at all of K through 12, where teachers who will not capitulate to this transgender, this pronoun neutral, this influences of postmodernism, are being disciplined and being fired. Well, those teachers, the ones that will use correct pronouns, understand biology, and that humans are what they are created, boy, girl, man, woman, and that there is significance to that biology, and that biology is only designed and maintained by the Creator. Whereas the transgenderism is playing God and making themselves part of all of those various tenets of that postmodernism, that it doesn't matter what you are, because you can define what you are, when you are, what you are, and your reality is your reality in your own mind. Really? Yeah, that's reality. So that's part of that. So those teachers are being persecuted. Those teachers are being fired. They're being put out on leave. So then you have only those, and in the school boards, that's why I always tell you, you want an action item for this year. Your action item for this year is that if you have any school board position that is coming up in any of your elections in 2020, you need to replace your school board with people that understand the foundations of this nation and constitutionality. I'll tell you that it was an evil thing that happened in our last election in our local school board. It was despicable, but that's a story for another day. So what we have is, I'm sure you've heard of it, but I've talked to a few people that have not read for ed. And if you're on social media, on the Facebook, that corrupt piece of garbage, or on Twitter Ditter, it is pound read for ed. It is a movement. It was started by another punk, and I call him a punk, a little communist punk down in Arizona, 23-year-old. In March of 2018, now a graduate student at the University of University of Wisconsin, Wisconsin communism. I was glad that Donald Trump was in Milwaukee this past week, because it was just a bolster to see all of those people that are there and eager to see Donald Trump get reelected. That's wonderful. But we know that in Madison, the University of Wisconsin is the University of Communism. Anyway, to that, this individual, this founder of Red for Ed, is now promoting next generation political teacher activism to academics in graduate schools around the country, in the graduate of education. So really taking this idea of socialism and communism directly, not subversively, as we have had up to this point, but directly, and making it a part of the education, the graduate education of future teachers. I think it's time to defund the whole educational system at the state level. If we could get away with it at the community level, I'm telling you, at the federal level, it absolutely needs to go away, because here it is right here, as you can see in your references at samueladamsreturns.net, is that the NEA has a page called Red for Ed. And it's got the red banner. It's a communist frickin' banner. Excuse my vernacular, but that's what it is. These people are absolutely insane. But, Red for Ed. Let's talk about that. It's what students deserve. We are Red for Ed. We want you to join the movement. It's for our students. It's so that classrooms are conducive to learning. And that we have access to school counselors, nurses, psychologists, and social workers, educators who know students by name. You know what? Every educator I ever had knew me by name, and when I needed a crack across the knuckles or my backside, guess what? They were there and they said your name when you got it. Oh, excuse me. Our educators, for our educators, a voice in shaping education policy. That's the union crap, okay? That's the NEA is the union crap. Salaries that allow educators to afford to stay in the profession they love. Well, when you're persecuting educators that stand for the American values, you don't give a rip what their salaries are. Opportunities to learn and lead. For our communities, access to opportunities no matter what you're looking for. Well, you know what? I apologize because I think that some of the best articles, and there's a couple from the Federalist, but the majority of the articles that flow on this whole Red for Ed thing are on Breitbart, because I think when I researched them, they're the most salient articles that are there for the references. But when you go and you look, this Red for Ed teachers rally around Bernie Sanders' socialist banner. You getting it? You see the look in my face? I know you on the radio aren't seeing that look in my face, but that's that pause. It's painful because that's Red for Ed. And it's in your school districts. It is in your school districts. You better get your butts out of here. Here's your action items for this week. Go to your computers. Go to the references at samueladamsreturns.net for today's program. Look that up. Get aware of it. Then you need to go find out when your school board is meeting next, and you need to put your name on the list to ask a question, and you need to look at your school board and that dude or dudette that is the head person for your school district, and you need to ask them very clearly, are you supporting Red for Ed? How much is Red for Ed affecting policy change in our school district? 2 questions. That's all you need to start with on your first meeting. But you need to go. Because you know what? Other than that, it doesn't matter. What else? Is that we got to get our educational system back. We have to get it back. And it's only going to start with you. So get your butts out of your seats. Get your feet on the streets. And the first thing is figure out what's going on in your educational system. The second thing is you need to figure out who are the constitutional candidates, not just conservatives. Because remember, my book right here, The Little Guy that you can get on Amazon, is not all conservatives are constitutionalist. You know? I know, preaching to the choir on these networks. I know. Taking a deep breath. I'm trying to learn how to filter that out. Red for Ed fuels Democrat Andy Berkshire in Kentucky's governor race. He's a communist. The guy's a deamoncrat communist. Bernie Sanders to attend Chicago Teachers Union strike authorization vote to show of Red for Ed unity. Bernie Sanders is right there for Red for Ed. I don't know what else to tell you at the moment. Is that if you're a parent, you probably would want to pull your kid out of school and figure out another way. You know, Dr. Gary North has, and that's in the references as well, he has a K through 12 basic free educational model that you as a parent can do, and even for those going to college. I mean, most of it's free. I think that once they get into high school, there may be a little bit of cost. If you're not doing something about your kids' education, these communists are going to take it over, Bernie Sanders and all the rest of them. And the rest of it is what's happening at the pulpits. You know, I mean, you got postmodern preachers out there, and you got Red for Ed teachers in your church, I'm sure. So I don't know. I guess at this point it's find out for yourself. Get yourself active on it. I know Sam Adams did. He educated his kids. He ensured that they had a Christian education, as well as did many of the anti-federalists. And we'll get into more of these issues as we come back in future programs.